All right, thank you everyone for joining this session. And for reference, this is session 3, and it is presented by University of Arizona Global Campus DEI Course Audit Rubric Facilitators. So John Bathke and Dr. Yolanda Harper will be leading our discussion today, and I'll be moderating, so please feel free to send me any questions during this chat and I'll do my best to address them. Let's see, a couple of quick notes. I have added in our chat some instructions on the closed caption feature. And I am seeing a note here about a live transcript or caption availability. I'm gonna check in on that for you, Edward. If this doesn't get addressed immediately, I do want to assure you that we are going to edit the transcription of this recording, and it will be shared along with a full transcript. So I'm sorry that you are having some issues right now. All right, so again, please pose your questions using the chat function. I'll moderate and discuss. Toward the end of the hour, we'll share how we can continue the conversation as well and share some additional resources to support your teaching. And now I would like to turn it over to John and Yolanda.
Good afternoon. We'd like to share the University of Arizona Global Campus Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Course Audit Rubric. My name is John Bathke, and I'm core faculty in the Masters of Organizational Management program within the Forbes School of Business at Uagc, and I'm along here with Dr. Harper.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yolanda Harper, and to the right here you see listed the other core members of our rubric development team. Our work was done under the supervision of Dean Lafferty, who is now our provost, and working with John and myself, we had our Assistant Vice President for Learning and Assessment, Tricia Lauer. We had Don Fry, who's a core faculty in Forbes, and a accounting professor, Michelle Rosser Majors, a psychology professor, as well as core faculty and over the Master's and Bachelor's in Psychology program, Miriam Ruiz, which is the associate or adjunct faculty member, and then Pamela Reyes, who also works for program reviews and in assessment. So a quick overview of our university, with the exception of a small number of programs that have residency requirements, students earn their degrees completely online in an asynchronous format. We have 2 colleges, Arts and Sciences and the Forbes School of Business and Technology. And the learning management system that we utilize is Canvas. The core or lead faculty in our university are responsible for developing the content that goes into the courses, the course shells. That includes the readings, assignments, any multimedia. And the shells remain active so that any core faculty member can review the content.
So the basic structure of UAGC course is a course shell that we alluded to. We have, of course, undergraduate and graduate courses. Undergraduate are 5 weeks, graduate courses are 6 weeks. And the course content typically consists of weekly discussion forums, usually 1 to 2 per week, as long as with a weekly written assignment. That's the main majority of our courses kind of follow that format. However, we do have other types of assignments and assessments. We have quizzes, journals, interactive assignments as well. So we do kind of have a whole plethora of ways that we can give students assignments. And likewise, course resources, we typically have a textbook or 2 associated with each course, as well as required articles and videos and other kind of interactive material as needed. So the courses allow for a variety of ways of construction, but at the same time, they're within a shell. And the quote unquote ownership of a course is with the lead faculty. They're in charge of the courses within a program. And then the core faculty underneath them do the teaching as well, but also maintenance and revision of the courses. But ultimately, the responsibility of a course owner is with the lead faculty, and that'll be important in our discussion. So to give you a little background on the genesis of our the DEI course audit rubric happened, towards the mid to late of last year with the civil unrest, with the murder of George Floyd. And so during that time, the president created a change advisory group to kind of address a lot of the issues that were being discussed within faculty and staff. And so then this group was created to start addressing DEI issues. And then out of that group, there was the DEI statement for UAGC. We are a global community that values diverse perspectives and actively pursues inclusive practices to support the success of our community of students, staff, and faculty. We value the dignity of the human experience. Our commitment is to champion the inclusivity of thought, belief, and choice of all populations, intentionally including the marginalized and underserved as an integral part of our mission to provide a broader and deeper educational experience. So this is kind of laid the groundwork, the foundation for this course audit rubric that we're going to share today.
So here, in additional background course sources included are 3 of our institutional outcomes, as you see listed here. And we also referred to the NACE, National Association of Colleges and Employers Competency, which is global and intercultural fluency, as well as the DOE's description of a globally and culturally competent individual, if you would. Next slide, please. So I've just, on the next couple of slides, just unpacked the NACE language, in case you hadn't reviewed it recently, about valuing, respecting, and learning, much of the same sentiment as John read from the university statement. And the next slide. Now the actual framework for the DOE is a much larger document, and I pulled just one section here, just in terms of how they note a global and culturally competent individual with a college degree. Those are the key abilities that individual would have. Next slide.
So in developing the course audit rubric, we collectively looked at some industry research. One of the first documents that we looked at was the document, Civil Engagement Value Rubric by the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And it's a great resource for faculty engagement, focuses on faculty engagement with students, but not so much on curriculum. Another one was the Anti-Racist Discussion Pedagogy by Dr. Shu, Houston, and Cooper, which is another great resource specifically on anti-racism. But again, the focus was on faculty engagement and not curriculum. The self-assessment rubric for the institutionalization of diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education by the New England Resource Center for Higher Education was another good document. It's a very holistic institutional assessment, but with limited emphasis on curriculum. However, it did provide some kind of framework. We were borrowed, if you will, some of the levels of assessment. They were influential in the adoption of our rubric. There were other resources, one I'll discuss later, but a lot of the resources are very good, especially in addressing anti-racism and faculty engagement, but there are very few resources that specifically address DEI representation within curriculum. And so that was kind of one of the challenges that we had to address.
So keeping in mind the content that we've shared, our ultimate goal is to have courses that are contemporary, culturally relevant, culturally appropriate, and model and promote development of industry and community relevant cultural awareness and cultural competencies. So to that end, the rubric is a comprehensive document. Before any data is entered into it at all, the document is 18 pages long. It's designed to prompt reviewers to examine all facets of the course. And while there are additional initiatives going on at our university to audit programs, as well as faculty instruction, the process and tools that John and I are discussing today focus exclusively on the course content. The goal is to offer opportunities for reflection, for constructive feedback, and a dialogue among colleagues about how the current course content and instructional methods reflect diversity, equity, inclusion, and in some cases, justice as well. It's an opportunity to identify strengths as well as concerns and to offer recommendations for improvement.
So the basic structure and operation of the DEI Corsotic rubric is rubric format. So basically you have categories of evaluation, which include the different components of a course. And along each category, there's different levels of assessment. There's transforming at the top, going on down to developing, emerging, and then not observed or not applicable. And for each category of evaluation, there's also a little box, and we'll show some examples coming up, where the reviewer can share notes, evidence, and reflections by reviewers, so they could specifically say, I like this course, what here in this regard because of X, Y, and Z, or this, I gave this kind of score in this category because I didn't like this image, or we need to take a look at these articles, so on and so forth. And throughout the document, definitions of both of DEI are included, but as well as these definitions of these levels of assessment, and we'll share examples of that. So the evaluation of a course is done by two individuals. So the lead faculty, who's the owner of the course and responsible for the disposition of that course, and then an external reviewer, external from that program. Ideally, hopefully it's someone from the other college. So if it's a Forbes course, someone from the College of Arts and Sciences would review it, or vice versa. But hopefully at least outside the program to kind of ensure a little impartiality, take some bias away. So it's a self-study process. So at the end of the review, the reviewers get together and have a dialogue, a discussion, compare notes and say, oh, I like this and didn't, and so on and so forth. In the end, there are some self-study questions that the lead faculty have to answer themselves. And so then the outcome of any of the review could be no changes, or the course could be revised. But in the end, it's the faculty that will make the determination. And so this is a part of a process. It's part of a dialogue, and that's kind of the main goal and aim of this rubric.
So let me talk a little bit about the pilot. From mid-December of 2020 through mid-January of this year, we conducted a pilot of our rubric to determine its utility and to identify areas where we could enhance it and maybe even add additional training for those using the rubric. We did provide a basic introduction and orientation to the rubric to clarify the pilot expectations and to provide some basic directions on the course audit expectations and how to utilize the rubric in the audit process. A total of 16 courses representing 15 programs from first year through doctoral level were included. And then subsequent to completing the rubric and having the co-auditors meeting, all participants completed a post-pilot survey to help us identify areas to improve the rubric, the process, and again, where training might be useful. And so we were happy to receive some specific feedback, and overall it was found that as it was in that particular format was useful, as you see, and then we did receive additional specific feedback that allowed us to improve it even more to the version we're using today. Here is a snapshot of one of the pages in the rubric utilized for the audit process. We're actually going to show you more of the rubric and get a little more interactive in just a few minutes here. But as you see along the top, we have the levels that John described earlier, and below we've identified the components being reviewed. John mentioned there are comment boxes which actually expand, so you can put text, screenshots, images to support your points. And then once the comments and other evidence are added, the rubric can expand substantially. We had submissions anywhere from 23 to in excess of 30 some odd pages. of information about specific courses. So, next slide.
So we'll take a few examples of different components or categories of the rubric. So this one looks at course learning outcomes. Now, of course, course learning outcomes for us, and I'm sure for other institutions, they are what the course is intended to impart upon a student upon successful completion of that course. And so it's like the foundation of that course. And so for this category, you can see course learning outcomes and then the different definitions of how the reviewer could or should review within that course. So wanted to take a look at a few examples. So here are some examples of 3 different course learning outcomes from 3 different courses. First one is, we'll get into the examples specifically later, but develop a global and intercultural knowledge of effective teams. Number 2 is examine the various cultural, political, and legal issues that impact international business activity. And the third one is locate authoritative sources of tax law to support a tax position relative to situations presented. So to ask the group, which one of those, the CLO 1, 2, or 3, appears to allow more DEI representation within its course? And I know we didn't get specifically into DEI definitions, but feel free to use your own, but indicate in the chat box which one you think is more representative of DEI or would allow for more representation of DEI within a course. Just curious as to what people think. Okay, we're getting some votes for 2. One person said 1, so a lot of people said 2. So thank you for your participation. So the first one was from OMM 695, which is Dynamics of Teamwork, which is a relatively new course. The second one is from BUS 616, International Business. And the last one is from Accounting 611, Advanced Tax Research. So, it produces or can bring about a lot of questions. They bring up a lot of issues. Within the School of Business, it brings up a lot of questions because, on the surface, business courses, tend to work on case studies. And a lot of those case studies tend to, be rigid. And a lot of the course developers tend to focus on bigger examples like Walmart and what have you, more dominant culture kind of examples. And so it's very easy to fall into those kinds of repetitive examples. But then we look at the third one, like a tax class, accounting class. How do we include DEI representation within that kind of course? Some people say, of course, you can't do that, but we looked at an article by Michael Dorno, 2015, Teaching Mathematics Education with Cultural Competency, and suggests that it can be done, that the subject matter can be presented with different perspectives, more diverse examples. And so within the college business, I think that's kind of one of our tasks, is to look at how we present case studies. What is the subject matter? Who are the actors involved? OMM 695 is a very interesting example we'll get into later. But it has a very nice, interesting backdrop, which the case study is this corporation called LearnENow, which is headed by a woman, and she's trying to expand into 3 countries into Africa. So, but with CLOs, it's very important because they're the foundation of the course, and they need to be paid, given a lot of attention, because it's very easy to take them for granted, and it's very easy to then forget about DEI when addressing CLOs. So.
Great points. Thank you, John. Here's what the rubric looks like for the section we would use to evaluate assignments. And while we do require the use of the rubric to prompt a thorough audit of the course, keep in mind, again, that a major goal is to collaborate with a colleague on how to improve the course where needed. As you might expect, some courses need little to no changes, whereas other courses will benefit from major revisions. Next slide. So here I've excerpted the main verbiage from the rubric page that was on the previous screen, just kind of distilling it down to where you can see where the main differences in the language exist among the 4 levels. And while we're only going to look at one assignment right now, keep in mind that the rubric rating applies to assignments as a whole within the course. So it may be that in a course, there's one assignment that needs a lot of work, or there may be several. Also, depending on the nature of the course, maybe having one transformative assignment is acceptable because you've got several other assignments that build up to that. This is why we use words like substantial, moderate, and minimal. And then in the training, we help flesh out what that means a little bit more. Instead of words, though, like many or few, which prompt a more quantitative mindset. Unless the course is explicitly a course within the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion genre, it is typically not expected that or even desirable that every single assignment address DEI or JEDI concerns explicitly. In a course like Cultural Awareness in the Human Services, yes, every single assignment should explicitly address diverse perspectives. Now, even in a course where maybe there might be a particular assignment that's not explicitly DEI oriented, still the instructions in all courses and the support resources available should foster equity. Inclusion should be evident in assignment content, in course resources and support resources. So now let's look at an assignment that needed some work. So this is the main bulk excerpt from an assignment in a course I recently reviewed. And what are your thoughts? Please share in the chat about this assignment. Think about making short-term as well as long-term recommendations. And I say short-term because this particular course is not on the schedule to be revised for a full revision, at least at this point. So unless there's something extremely egregious, changes have to be made inside the box rather than expanding the box or throwing the box out. So meaning the topic still needs to align with the current readings, it still needs to align with the current weekly learning outcomes and the existing grading rubric. So, and there's certainly a place in the rubric to note the different types of recommendations we would make. But so what are your thoughts about this particular assignment? Would you consider it a top priority to address immediately, a high priority to address within, let's say, the next 3 months? And we can go ahead and go over onto the next slide so they can see what I'm referring to. So there's a place in the rubric for our summary reflections and to comment on when we make recommendations, how urgent these changes need to exist. Again, top priority, you need to change this right now because it's really bad. High priority, it needs some serious work. Within the next 3 months, this needs to be updated. Intermediate priority, well, we're concerned about it, but it can wait till the course actually comes up on the revision schedule. Or anything that other than that would just be an opportunity for improvement that the lead faculty could, take or leave. So no opinions about the assignment. Okay. Could you go back to that one just for a minute? So if you notice the first and second, basically in the second line, that you have the students reflecting on a quote by a British historian. Now, if you go forward 2 more, please. Okay, so this is actually an excerpt of the same assignment after being revised. So as you see, it kind of starts out the same, and next slide, but rather than one quote by a British historian, students now select 2 quotes from among 14 quotes representing a wider range of diversity. They also have the option of adding a 3rd quote that's not on the list in case there's one that they are particularly passionate about, allowing the assignment to be even more inclusive. And then we'll just kind of zip through the next slide I won't spend a lot of time here, but this slide and the next slide just show that, point out how the instructions were made more explicit, providing for greater equity, not assuming that all students would just come and know what they should include in a 2 to 3 page paper and make it scholarly, but also have the direct links to examples for each of the required components. And if you follow the links, in most cases, you'll find the information available in more than one format. It's not all just written format. Okay, next slide.
So we'll take a short examination of discussion forums. This is a very common assignment within our courses. So basically it's maybe a backdrop of a question, and then questions for the students to share themselves, their answers, but then also they're asked to respond to other students' posts and thoughts. So we thought we'd just take a moment to look at 2 examples of some discussion forum questions and to see maybe some differences. So this first one, I'll just read: with financial literacy and skill, you will be better equipped to make wise decisions when it comes to money. Investors review many factors before determining whether to buy stock from a company. And so it says, in discussion, list the key metrics you would consider before purchasing stock in a company. List and explain the components of the ratios that would be most important for you to analyze before making an investment decision. So contrast that discussion question with this one. So as a manager within Learning Now, an international company that sells virtual learning technology to its clients, you manage a team of 4 members, including yourself. Your team is tasked with preparing for a business presentation to the Navajo Nation Tribal Council. Your proposal will aim to have your product utilized in at least 5 of the tribally run elementary schools. Outline 3 main considerations: cultural, political, or general etiquette that your team should be aware of when presenting this proposal to the tribal government, and how should you handle these issues. So my question to the participants is, which of these questions, this one or the previous one that was shared, seems to include more DEI representation, and DQ1 or DQ2? And you can post your response in the discussion. So a lot of people are leaning towards, obviously, to discussion 2. So the first one was from Financial Business, BUS 592, Financial Business Overview. And the second one is from the Dynamics of a Teamwork, OMM 695. And so, the second one, I think a lot of people will agree with, it has more DEI representation within it because it involves the tribal government, which reflects an underserved population. And also it promotes, the assignment specifically asks the student to engage or to develop cultural sensitivity within their presentation. And so this, assignment was consciously inserted within the course. And I think, again, well, not again, but, we operate, I think most people do who are really engaged in DEI, know that DEI really the effort needs to be very conscious and sustained. And so this was, I think, a good example of how, when you consciously engage in that effort, it can benefit the course. And so, but then the question comes up, like with this financial business overview, what do we do with, I use the term dry subject matter, such as math, accounting, STEM. How do you rate or review dry course content in regards to DEI representation? On the surface, it doesn't seem like it lends itself to that. But again, there is material that suggests, in fact, that it can be done. But again, that effort needs to be consciously done. And again, for something like this financial business overview, I think it would be a good way for the team or group or the university to start developing best practices of how to address these kind of subject matters. So, but this is, a consideration that we have to take in, like with discussion forum assignments.
Okay, so here's what the rubric levels for rating images look like. Because our time is limited, we'll only look at a couple of images. However, the rubric does prompt reviewers to look at all images, next slide, everywhere in the course, whether it's the homepage, all learning activities, back one, all learning activities, the textbook, and for us, just to clear up what standardized guidance means, that refers to the lectures that are built into the course. So many of our courses have lectures built in, and then some courses, the lectures aren't built in, but the faculty teaching creates their own lecture. So now we can go to the images. So these are a couple, and you can click to the next one too. Okay, are a couple of images from an accounting textbook that I reviewed. What are your thoughts? Yeah, that was my thoughts as well. So we had some concerns, and this is a textbook. I won't out the author, but it's a standard accounting textbook published by Pearson. And so in a case like this, let's say how are you going to balance? You may or may not want to throw out an entire textbook. If you look at the rest of the textbook, actually there was a theme. So there were some diverse photos within the textbook, but all of the images, like where you see hierarchies like this, they look like this. Where there were some diverse pictures and the scenario, so you had diverse business owners. In literally over 90% of the cases, the business owner who did not look like these images here was asking a question out of demonstrating a lack of knowledge, whereas the business owners that looked like these images here were shown in positions of strength. So again, you may or may not want to throw out a textbook because of images, but if you choose to keep a textbook, but first of all, that's the decision of the faculty member who leads the course, but using the rubric, you can bring those kind of issues to the faculty member's attention who was not aware, had not noticed the consistent theme in the images. And I assume that is probably a lot of unconscious bias on the part of the author or whoever selected the images for this particular book. But then if you're going to keep the book, where are you going to provide balance? So are you going to have videos that show other examples? Are you going to make sure that you cover using accounting principles in diverse types of companies? Are you going to foster the development of cultural competency skills to be able to work with diverse business owners? So again, the rubric is to call out concerns, to stimulate a conversation among colleagues, and to hopefully brainstorm on some suggestions. There's no ultimate number assigned to say this is a good course, this is a bad course, because some aspects under every category may be exceptionally great and some may be problematic. Next slide. So here are some excerpts from a statistics textbook that I reviewed, actually, luckily, while this book was being written for a course. And I noted several phrases. You can click again so they can see both places that I've highlighted. And why are these phrases problematic? And would they be problematic only for a statistics textbook, or, let me see. So arm's length assessment, or brushing away the cobwebs. Does everyone know what these mean? I could tell you some of my English language learner students, or students, I won't say any particular decade when they were born, but these kinds of phrases may be more familiar to some decades than others. So, but certainly can be problematic for English language learners because they're idiomatic expressions that if you're an English language learner, you might read those as literal. Arm length assessment, how is this related to statistics? Brushing off cobwebs, what does that have to do with statistics? So as I said earlier, luckily these concerns were addressed before the textbook was published, but what would you do if you reviewed a live course and saw this type of language in a book? Would you bring it to the faculty members' attention? Would you hope that the students would just Google brushing off the cobwebs and figure out what that meant? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so if you're stuck with the book, if it's already there, thank you, Shannon, you would hopefully add an explanation and provide some way to clarify whether it's in the mini lecture or some other comments for the students. Yeah, a lot of the colloquialisms, I Google myself. So, all right, next slide. Here's another textbook example, this time from a live course. And chapter 1 begins just like almost every introduction to psychology textbook begins. So let's reflect for a moment. What do you see here? Very Western European, yeah. Next slide. So now let's chat. So how might you utilize a rubric to document the concern? Would be the first question, regardless of how you rated the book. Because again, the rubric is to prompt the audit, is a tool for the audit process. So ultimately, whether I rate something as severely problematic and John rates it as intermediate, it's the conversation that happens afterwards that is the power of the process. Let me see. Okay, Tim. Okay. Oh, good. We're kind of wrapping up. Okay, so so how might we address the concern in our follow-up meeting with the instructor? What recommendations might we make? Again, you're going to be hard-pressed to find an introduction to psychology textbook that doesn't begin psychology with Greek philosophy and doesn't then subtly suggest that the Greeks were the only people on the planet who had philosophies. You know, where are the Native American philosophies? Where are the Indian, the Chinese, the African philosophies, all of which informed each group's subsequent psychologies. But so again, you may not be able to find a textbook that does that, but then what else can we add to the course that reminds people that there are other origins to psychology and other perspectives on psychology? We'll move on. Ask the students, great recommendation.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your participation. We appreciate it. Just to go quickly over some media examples. Here is an interactive media resource that's in with one of our courses here in the week 5 discussion in the ethics and legal responsibility in early learning settings. And so here they can engage and click on these images and get more information. And when you click on race and ethnicity, here you see they explain or offer some more explanation. I don't want to say explanation, but here they give a little share of biases that teachers and teachers that are giving individualized educational plans may fall into. Here it says African-American students are labeled emotionally disturbed at almost twice the rate of their Caucasian peers, or Native Americans overrepresented in the category of mental retardation. And so, you know, we share this obviously, you know, as a good example of how, you know, a course may add positive media and images into a course. But within that same course, we had this video. This video is in the week 3 assignment, same course, and this video addresses the individualized educational plans that teachers and professionals may have to give. Now, on the surface, you know, it seems benign, but when you look at it, all the actors, the participants are white, and there are no people of color in here. So both the parents are white, and all the professionals are white. So then, you know, it kind of goes back to the example maybe that Dr. Harper had, you know, about the images that, you know, sometimes you're going to encounter these within courses. are we able to balance them? Sometimes we are, sometimes this media image could balance with the one we just saw, where it, specifically talks about biases that teachers and educational professionals can fall into, negative biases. And so, one of the questions though, and Dr. Harper kind of already asked this question, is it possible for all course content, for all courses, to include DEI representation? Yet maybe if you want to share yes or no within the chat area. But as Dr. Harper said, it may not be possible and it may not be advisable to do that. But chances are it's going to be very difficult unless the course is specifically DEI or JEDI. So, but these are things that we have to take into consideration. But we have to look at the type of media that we're using, and maybe that interactive was created to offset this type of media that they had available, and maybe some disciplines don't have a lot of resources that include a lot of DEI representation. So those are some considerations that we have to take into account when we're reviewing a course. And these are just some examples of some of the self-study and reflection questions at the end of the rubric. So these are the questions that the lead faculty will have to engage in. Reflect on the DEI statement and the institutional learning outcomes, and explain how your course aligns with each. Provide examples of ways you assess the effectiveness of your efforts to integrate the DEI into the fabric of the curriculum for this course. Identify any barriers or challenges to fully integrating diversity, equity, and/or inclusion into the course.
And here are just a few more examples. There are actually a total of 12 questions for reflection. And it was interesting during the pilot, we had some faculty say, after doing the reflection questions, I get it now, so the questions were put there really to be as much educational as not just exclusively for auditing the course, but for helping to make sure all who are looking at courses have a mindset of why this is important and how we can do a better job of doing so. We mentioned the one about barriers and challenges. That allows for, because this process, as John will talk about, will be mandatory for all courses. As you might expect, not everyone is going to be excited about spending 20 hours or more auditing their course, but we think the vast majority will be. And thus far we've had people asking for it even before the final current version was completed. So overall, there is a lot of energy and enthusiasm around it. Next slide.
So that segues into some really positive recent developments. The UAGC Faculty Council voted to implement this DEI course audit rubric. So all upcoming course revisions will have to implement this rubric. They'll have to engage in that process. When a program goes through, every 5 years, a program goes through program review. So when that process begins, all the courses within a program will be asked to do this DEI course audit rubric. And then the remaining courses by 2023. So we're really happy that administration has really gotten behind this and supported this process from top down. It's received a lot of support. So we're very thankful that the university has really engaged in this.
And so that's all we have for right now. We did save time for questions, other comments, and we're catching up on reading through the comments as well. And we know that other institutions like Peralta are doing work, and each institution's rubrics will need to be a little bit different based on how their courses are formatted and how deep of a dive, there might be some rubrics I've seen that are 1 page. Ours is 18 pages because we wanted to look at everything and remind auditors to look at everything. And also then, in addition to everything that we've listed, there's still space in case we've missed anything, open-ended space for additional comments.
I think Kevin raised his hand.
Yes.
Thank you for this discussion, by the way. I think it's amazing. And how, my question on going back to like, when you asked about, can we use DEI in every course? I work for Quality Matters right now, and I worked for an institution previously. And I feel like looking at, at creating courses with faculty and having been faculty and looking at, what goes into courses, I think there's opportunities to put, to do this in any course. It doesn't matter whether it's science or liberal arts or whatever. So I was just wondering if you had maybe just some more thoughts on using this in courses that traditionally are not, say like in the sciences or something like that, like how some thoughts on how you guys would incorporate DEI, basically.
Yeah, so this is why I used a couple of examples from accounting. John may have something. One idea that comes to mind for sciences and accounting as well is that even when the content seems very straightforward, like we're just teaching them how to calculate numbers in math, or there's still role models, diverse role models that and experts that can be the authors of the articles and the presenters in the videos that we include. If we used to call them story problems when I was in school, or the problem-based scenarios, to make sure that diversity and equity, inclusion, and justice are exhibited in those examples. In the sciences, whether it's physics, and we're talking about Fred Bathke, who's a Dene, who was the first Dene, formerly called Navajo physicist, as a wonderful role example. So it can be role models, it can be examples. John mentioned earlier, making sure that in a business course, we're not just using big mainstream corporations as examples for our case studies. Additional thoughts, John?
Yeah, just to, along the same lines, we can offer diverse perspectives on STEM courses and business courses that seemingly don't approach DEI, but there are ways to incorporate that in any course, yes. And
minimally role models, because there are experts from many different representing many different types of diversity that can be the experts, authors of the resources that we have students read, as well as the presenters and videos.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. And everyone, thank you for attending. We had a really big turnout for this workshop, and I really enjoyed watching it myself. And so my question is mirroring someone's early question. Will this slide deck be available later for people who attended? Okay, yes, wonderful.
We can definitely make it available. Yeah. If we can link it in the Padlet, we'll do that. If not, we'll just make sure you have it.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And everyone, I put the Padlet link in your chat, so please go there right now and give them support and add any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask. Once again, I'm Maria Guzman. Thank you, Dr. Harper. Thank you, John Bathke. I really appreciated everything you had to share today. Thank you, everyone.
For attending, and thank you, Maria, for your assistance. You were wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Have a great day, everyone.
Okay.